Daniel never thought his life would change on an ordinary evening. He had just finished work at the small repair dock on the orbital station above Mars. It was routine work, tightening bolts, fixing shuttle engines, and running diagnostics on tired old freighters. Nothing special. He was only 24 with no big dreams beyond saving enough credits to one day buy his own ship. But that night when he left the repair bay, he saw her waiting. She didn't look human. That was the first thing he noticed. Her skin glimmered faint silver under the corridor lights like a surface touched by starlight. Her eyes were deep violet, calm but sharp, as if they could read him before he even spoke. Her clothes were strange too, flowing robes marked with symbols he didn't recognize, clearly not from Earth or any human colony. "Daniel Ward," she said softly, her voice carrying an accent he couldn't place. "You are the one I'm looking for." Daniel stopped, confused. "Do I know you?" She smiled faintly. "Not yet, but you will. My name is Rylus." He shifted uneasily. Station corridors weren't usually places for chance encounters with alien women, especially ones who spoke his name before he gave it. "All right, Rylus. What do you want with me?" She stepped closer, her presence strangely magnetic. "I've come to invite you to play a game." Daniel blinked. Of all the things she could have said, that was the last he expected. "A game?" he repeated. "You tracked me down just to ask me that?" Her smile widened, but her eyes remained serious. "Yes, a very important one. It is not like the games your kind plays for fun. This one is greater. It tests the mind, the spirit, and the will to fight." Daniel gave a short laugh, though it came out more nervous than amused. "Look, I'm not really into alien tournaments or whatever this is. You probably have the wrong guy." But she shook her head firmly. "No, you are exactly the right one. You humans, you see things differently. That is why I chose you." Daniel frowned. Chosen? For what? And why him? A simple mechanic? Nothing about this felt normal. "What happens if I say no?" he asked cautiously. "Then you walk away," she answered. "You keep fixing engines. You keep dreaming small dreams. And you will never know what you could have been." There was something in her tone, half challenge, half promise, that stirred something inside him. Still, he wasn't ready to jump into whatever strange ritual she was offering. "All right," Daniel said slowly. "Tell me about this game. What's the catch?" Rylus tilted her head, her violet eyes glimmering. "No catch. Only truth. You will be given command. Fleets, worlds, choices. What you do with them will be your test. Lose, and you leave empty-handed. Win, and you will change more than you can imagine." Daniel let out a breath. "Fleets and worlds? Sounds like some strategy simulation. What's so special about it?" "You'll see," she whispered. Before he could respond, she lifted a small crystalline device from her sleeve. It shimmered, projecting a faint glow across the corridor. Daniel felt a sudden pull, like gravity shifting. His vision blurred, the corridor fading away. He stumbled, reaching for the wall, but his hand passed through empty light. His heart raced. "Wait. What's happening?" Her voice echoed calmly, even as the world dissolved around him. "You accepted, Daniel Ward. Now the game begins." When his sight cleared, Daniel was no longer on the station. He stood on a wide platform of black stone, stretching endlessly under a star-filled sky. Floating above were massive holographic displays, swarms of ships, planets orbiting, numbers shifting rapidly. Other figures stood at distant platforms, each one alien and unique, watching their own projections. Daniel's breath caught. This was no simple game room. It felt vast, endless, heavy. He looked down. His clothes had changed. Gone was his work uniform, replaced with a dark jacket marked by a silver emblem. It felt strange, but fit perfectly, as though tailored for him. Rylus appeared beside him, her expression calm, as though nothing unusual had happened. "Welcome, Daniel," she said. "This is the Hall of Convergence, the stage of the game." He turned in a slow circle, trying to take it all in. "This is insane. How did I get here?" "The device brought you," she explained. The game is played here beyond your normal space. Few ever see it. Even fewer are allowed to join. And you just dragged me into this without asking? Daniel snapped, his nerves rising. I did ask, she replied with a quiet smile. And you didn't say no? Daniel clenched his jaw. Technically, she wasn't wrong, but he hadn't known what he was agreeing to. Across the platform, one of the alien figures turned and looked at him. It was tall, reptilian, with golden armor and cold eyes. Another was insectoid, its wings folded, mandibles clicking softly. More stood beyond them, avian, crystalline, even beings made of shifting light. All of them radiated intelligence and power, and all of them were watching him. Daniel's stomach dropped. Why do I feel like I just walked into something way over my head? Because you did, Rylus answered simply. One of the displays shifted, focusing on Daniel. Rows of ships appeared, sleek, silver craft, massive battleships and carriers marked with unknown banners. At the edge of the map, planets glowed, with lines showing trade routes, resource lanes, and defensive grids. A deep voice thundered through the hall, echoing in every mind. New contender recognized. Human entry confirmed. The match begins. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't a simple game of cards or dice, it was war, at least a simulation of it. He turned to Rylus. You said it was just a game. Her expression softened, almost apologetic. It is. But sometimes, Daniel, games are more real than you think. Daniel stared at the fleets hovering before him, his hands trembling slightly. He had never commanded anything larger than a repair drone, and now he was expected to direct entire starfleets against creatures who looked like they had been doing this for centuries. This is insane, he muttered, but deep inside a spark flickered, a challenge, something dangerous, impossible, but strangely exciting. Rylus leaned closer. Do not think like them. Do not play like them. You are human. That is why you are here. Use it. Her words sank into him. For the first time, Daniel felt that maybe he wasn't chosen by mistake. He took a deep breath, staring at the display of ships awaiting his command. All right, he whispered. If this is a game, then let's play. And as the first signals flashed across the map and fleets began to move, Daniel realized something. Daniel's fingers hovered over the holographic controls, unsure where to begin. Ships, stars, and trade routes flickered across the platform. Before him, each icon representing power, life, and strategy beyond his understanding. The alien spectators had grown silent, their attention fixed entirely on him. He could feel their eyes, judging, testing, expecting him to fail. Relax, Rylus said softly beside him. Look at it not as a war, but as a puzzle. The pieces move because you command them. Learn their patterns, then break them. Daniel nodded slowly, though he wasn't sure he believed her. A puzzle felt simpler. A game of war that could shape. Star systems felt anything but simple. He started with the basics. Selecting a small fleet of scout ships, he sent them toward a nearby sector. Nothing dramatic, just reconnaissance, learning the positions of enemy ships and nearby planets. The scouts zipped into space, trails of light following them. One of the alien spectators, a tall armored being with silver scales, hissed softly. Daniel caught a flicker of amusement and annoyance in its gaze. He realized immediately that the aliens expected predictable moves. Every human instinct he had screamed at him to act boldly, not cautiously. Don't be afraid to take risks, Rylus whispered. They cannot predict your choices if you do what they would never do. Daniel's heartbeat sped up. He wasn't a general, not even close. But maybe he didn't have to be. Maybe that was the advantage humans had, imagination and unpredictability. He tapped the controls again, and instead of sending the scouts along the safest path, he sent them through a narrow asteroid field, a route that seemed dangerous, but could cut hours off their journey. The alien spectators leaned forward, eyes narrowing. It was reckless, maybe foolish, but Daniel felt a thrill as the ships glided through the jagged rocks. None were lost. There, he said, grinning despite himself. Sometimes taking the hard path works. Rylus smiled faintly, her violet eyes glimmering. Good. That is the human way. Next, Daniel turned to the resource planets under his command. They were small, barren worlds with minimal defenses. The aliens likely expected him to gather resources slowly, carefully as their kind would do. Instead, he decided to invest boldly in production, double the factories, launch multiple mining drones at once, and risk overloading the systems. The display flickered. Warnings flashed red. He ignored them. Within minutes, the resource output tripled. Some drones collided, but the net gain was enormous. The alien spectators muttered among themselves. He wasn't following their careful, calculated method. He was inventing his own. Daniel's confidence grew. Each move, each decision, was a small rebellion against centuries of alien tactics. They valued patience, precision, and tradition. He valued instinct, creativity, and speed. And somehow, it was working. Then came the first real challenge: enemy contact. A fleet of sleek black ships appeared on the holographic map, moving toward his sector. Daniel recognized immediately that they outnumbered his own forces. The instinct of fear surged, but he forced himself to think. Hold position, he muttered to himself. The aliens wouldn't understand a human pause. The victories came fast, too fast for Daniel's own comfort. Each battle, each decision had seemed thrilling, almost exhilarating. Yet as the simulated sun set over the holographic star systems, he began noticing something strange. It was the look in the eyes of the spectators. They weren't impressed in the way a crowd might cheer for skill. No, their expressions carried worry, tension, and, he couldn't put a name to it, fear. Daniel had won, yes, but he had done it by breaking centuries of tradition. The human way of fighting, reckless, instinctive, bold, had thrown their entire calculation off balance. Rylus stood beside him as he watched a fleet disappear behind a glowing planet. What are they thinking? Daniel asked, frowning. They are realizing something, she said softly. Something they did not expect. That your victories are not just tricks of chance. They are consequences of human instinct. You do not fight as a controlled mind would. You fight as a living being. Daniel stared at the holographic fleets. Consequences of instinct. He didn't fully understand what she meant. For him it was survival, speed, and making the best choices he could in the moment. But the spectators, aliens from dozens of species, each a master strategist in their own right, watched him as if he were dangerous. Dangerous. The word echoed in Daniel's mind. He was just a mechanic from Mars, a human who had never commanded more than a small shuttle. And yet, here he was, turning centuries of strategy upside down. A crystalline figure approached him next. It glimmered in the ambient light, reflecting colors across the platform. Its voice was melodic but carried authority. Human, it said. Do you understand the consequences of your actions? Daniel shook his head. I'm just playing. The game, isn't that the point? The figure clicked softly as if disappointed. This is no mere game. Every command you make influences more than this simulation. You control fleets that exist in real space. You affect real worlds. You are meddling where no human should tread. Daniel froze. His heart beat rapidly. Real fleets? Real worlds? He had assumed it was just a simulation, a test, a game as Rylus had called it. But the truth seemed different, far darker than anything he could have imagined. Rylus's voice broke through the silence. I warned you, and yet you agreed to play. Now you know the weight of your choices. Daniel felt a surge of guilt. He had won battles, captured planets, and sent fleets into enemy lines without fully understanding the cost. What if lives were lost? What if entire civilizations were at stake because of his human instincts? He clenched his fists, staring at the glowing display. I didn't know, he said quietly. I never wanted to hurt anyone. Rylas placed a hand on his shoulder, gentle but firm. No one expected you to. But now that you do, you must decide how to move forward. The room shifted. New fleets appeared on the holographic map, approaching from unknown sectors. Enemy commanders, more experienced than the first, were moving with deadly precision. They had studied the human, learned from his reckless style, and now came prepared. Daniel swallowed hard. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him like gravity. He had started this journey thinking it was a game, a challenge, something to prove his skill. Now it felt real, terrifyingly real. He studied the map. The new enemy formations were complex, layered, and aggressive. Any mistake would cost more than just virtual ships. Every decision had weight. Every command could ripple across star systems. "You can do this," Rylas whispered. "Trust yourself. Trust your instincts. Humans survive where others fail." Daniel took a deep breath. He focused on the fleets under his control. He reviewed the planets he had captured, the resources he had gained, and the allies he had in his corner. For the first time, he felt the gravity of his advantage. Humans didn't follow the rigid patterns of alien strategy. Humans could improvise, adapt, and think creatively. That was his edge. With a shaking hand, he began issuing commands. Scouts darted forward, drawing enemy attention. Main fleets maneuvered through asteroid fields, striking from angles no alien strategist would expect. Resource planets were fortified, quickly, protecting the bases he had worked so hard to capture. The enemy reacted aggressively, but Daniel was already 2 steps ahead. Every unexpected human choice forced them to adapt, slow their calculations, and second-guess centuries of tradition. He was learning fast, thinking faster, and the thrill of control began to replace the fear. Yet, the guilt lingered. Daniel kept thinking about what the crystalline alien had said, about consequences in real space. What if people were really at risk? Could he, a single human, carry the weight of countless lives without breaking? He looked at Rylas. "Tell me, is this real?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. Rylas's violet eyes met his. She looked troubled. "It is both real and a test. Some outcomes are real. Some are recorded only to measure your instincts. You must learn to trust yourself anyway. You do not have centuries of training, Daniel, but you have something they cannot calculate." Daniel frowned. "And what is that?" "Human ingenuity," she said softly. "The ability to see solutions others cannot. The courage to act when all odds are against you. The willingness to risk everything because it must be done." Daniel swallowed. It sounded like a heroic phrase from a book or a story, not something he thought applied to him. He was just a mechanic. Yet at that moment, he realized something profound. Maybe humans really did have an edge in the universe. Maybe, even here, among these advanced alien strategists, a human could survive and even triumph, where others would fail. The next wave of enemy fleets advanced. Daniel felt the weight of choice once again. He could retreat, play safe, and hope to survive. Or he could take a bold chance, flank, strike, and disrupt their formation completely. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting instinct guide him. Then he issued the commands. Ships raced through the void, weaving between asteroids and striking at the enemy's flank. Explosions lit the simulation like fireworks. For a brief moment, Daniel felt invincible. The aliens were silent, watching, in shock as a human single-handedly twisted the battlefield in ways they had not predicted. The golden-armored enemy commander growled in frustration. "Impossible," it hissed. "How can one human change everything?" Daniel grinned, adrenaline coursing through him. "I don't know," he muttered. "I just do what feels right." Rylas smiled faintly, a hint of pride in her eyes. "That is why you are here. You play differently. You think differently, you survive differently. And now you are learning the truth of the game." Daniel looked around at the spectators. Some were whispering, some were frowning, but all were watching him with newfound respect and fear. The realization hit him. Humans were underestimated. Always. And that underestimation could be the difference between survival and defeat. As the holographic sun set over the battlefield, Daniel took a deep breath. He had survived the first real test. He had made mistakes, yes, but he had learned quickly. And he had done it the only way a human could, through instinct, creativity, and the willingness to act when others hesitated. Yet, deep inside, he couldn't shake the gnawing question. If this was more than a game, if lives were really at stake, could he keep playing without crossing a line he couldn't return from? Rylus watched him closely, as if reading his thoughts. Be careful, Daniel. The game is more than it seems. Soon you will see the consequences of victory and defeat, and only then will you understand why humans are feared, not for their power, but for their unpredictability. Daniel swallowed hard. He didn't feel like a hero yet. He felt like a boy who had stepped into something far larger than himself, something that could not be controlled no matter how clever or brave he might be. But one thing was clear. He could not quit. Not now. Not when he had tasted the edge of possibility. Not when he had glimpsed the strength humans could bring to even the most alien battlefield. He squared his shoulders, stared at the fleets, and whispered to himself, "Let them see what humans can do." And with that, Daniel began his next moves, ready to face challenges far beyond anything he had imagined. Daniel felt the tension in the Hall of Convergence like a physical weight. The simulation stretched endlessly, with new enemy fleets forming, in distant sectors, more complex than anything he had encountered. He had won the first battles, yes, but the enemy had begun to adapt. They were learning his unpredictability. "You need to change tactics," Rylus said softly, standing beside him. Her violet eyes glimmered as the holographic display reflected in them. "They expect your usual moves now. You must evolve." Daniel nodded. He could feel his heartbeat pounding in his chest. For the first time, fear mixed with excitement. His hands hovered over the controls, trembling slightly, but a spark of determination lit inside him. He was human, and humans thrived in moments like this. The first wave of the new enemy fleet approached quickly. It was larger, faster, and better coordinated than the last. Daniel noticed patterns, predictable angles, repeated maneuvers, rigid formations. They were trying to trap him. He smirked. Humans didn't fight like that. "Rylus," he asked quietly, "what if I fail?" She tilted her head. "Then you learn. That is how humans survive. You adapt. You endure. You do not give up." Daniel clenched his fists. Fail was not an option. Not now. He began issuing commands at a speed he hadn't thought possible. Small scout ships darted through asteroid belts to harass the enemy's flank, drawing their attention. Behind them, Maint. Daniel had fought wave after wave of enemy fleets. He had survived, adapted, and even excelled beyond anything the alien spectators had expected. His confidence had grown, but along with it came a gnawing unease. Something about the Hall of Convergence didn't feel entirely right. The victories were real, too real. Every strike, every captured planet, every lost ship had weight. Daniel had assumed it was a simulation, a controlled test, but as he watched the enemy commanders retreat, he began to see cracks in the illusion. "Rylus," he said quietly, his voice tense. This isn't just a game, is it?" She looked at him, her violet eyes serious, almost sorrowful. "Daniel, it is, and it is not. The Hall of Convergence tests instincts, yes, but it also influences reality. Some of what you do here affects real fleets, real planets, and real people." Daniel froze. "What, you mean lives? Real lives?" Rylus nodded slowly. "Yes. Some outcomes here determine actual events in space. That is why humans are rare participants. Your kind is unpredictable. The risk is high." Daniel felt his stomach turn. He had been making decisions, sending fleets, attacking planets, without fully understanding the consequences. And now he realized The consequences might be far greater than he had imagined. He looked at the holographic display. Enemy fleets were regrouping, and he had the power to strike again. Every choice now was heavier than the last. One wrong move could result in massive destruction. "Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel asked, his voice tight with anger and fear. "I warned you," Rylus replied softly. "I said it was a game, but I did not reveal the full truth. It was to test not just skill but courage and judgment. Could a human survive knowing the stakes? Could you act despite fear?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, feeling overwhelmed. "I thought I was just playing a game. I thought mistakes didn't matter." Rylus placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "Mistakes always matter here, Daniel. But humans, you have something no one else has. You can think beyond calculation. You can act beyond expectation. That is why you are here." Daniel closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He had to focus. Fear alone would not help him. He had survived countless waves of enemy fleets by relying on instinct, creativity, and courage. Now he had to do the same, only with far higher stakes. New enemy fleet appeared on the display. It was massive, faster, and more aggressive than any before. Daniel realized immediately that this was not just another wave. It was a test of his judgment under real pressure. "Rylus," he said quietly, "how do I know which choices will hurt real people and which won't?" "You won't," she said gently. "That is why this is a test. You must decide, act, and adapt. Your instincts will guide you. Your human edge will determine the outcome." Daniel swallowed hard. He had never felt more exposed. Every choice carried weight. Yet somehow a strange calm settled over him. Fear was natural, but it could not control him. Humans survived because they faced fear, adapted, and moved forward. He began issuing commands. Scouts darted through asteroid belts to probe enemy positions, while main fleets shifted into unpredictable formations. Resource planets were reinforced, key positions protected, and hidden strike teams moved silently to intercept enemy advances. The enemy commander, golden-armored and furious, hissed in frustration. "This human, he does not play by logic. He does not follow rules. How can one being disrupt centuries of strategy?" Daniel's grin was faint but determined. "I don't know," he muttered. "But it works." Rylus watched him closely, her expression conflicted. She had brought him here for observation, not to intervene. Yet Daniel was not just surviving, he was excelling. He was teaching them aliens something they had never learned. Humans could not be predicted, controlled, or underestimated. Hours passed. Daniel moved fleets, adjusted strategies, and responded to enemy attacks with instinctive brilliance. Every victory brought a mixture of relief and dread. He was winning, yes, but at what cost? Finally, after a particularly intense engagement, the enemy commander signaled a pause. The golden figure appeared in the central viewing platform, its expression unreadable but intense. "Human Daniel Ward," it said, voice echoing across the hall. "Your performance has exceeded all expectations. You have disrupted centuries of strategy. Yet, you must understand the consequences of your actions." Daniel's heart pounded. I do understand, and I'm ready to keep going. Just tell me the truth. What is this really about?" The enemy commander's gaze softened slightly. "This is a proxy conflict. The fleets you command exist in real space. The planets you capture are real. The lives under your command are real. The game tests not only skill but judgment, morality, and leadership." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "So, everything I've done mattered?" "Yes," Rylus said quietly. "And now that you know, you must act with even greater care. The next decisions will not only test your skill, but your conscience." Daniel stared at the holographic battlefield. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him. He had thought this was a game, a challenge to test his instincts. Now he realized it was a real war, with consequences he could not ignore. He ran his hands over the controls, thinking fast. Every planet, every fleet, every decision mattered. He could not act recklessly. He had to think creatively, adapt quickly, and protect those under his command. "Rylus," he said finally, his voice firm, "I understand. I will do this, not for the game, but for the people out there, counting on me." She smiled faintly, pride and worry mixing in her expression. "That is why you are human. You do not act for glory, for power, or for amusement. You act because it must be done." Daniel felt a strange surge of determination. Fear still lingered, but now it was tempered with purpose. He had the chance to prove not just his skill, but the strength of humans in the face of impossible odds. The enemy fleet advanced again, faster and more coordinated than ever. Daniel took a deep breath and began issuing orders with precision. Scouts flitted through asteroid fields, decoys drew enemy fire, and hidden strike teams intercepted attacks. Each maneuver was risky, each choice heavy with consequence. Yet Daniel moved with confidence, trusting his instincts and human ingenuity. The enemy faltered under his unpredictable tactics, and slowly, the tide began to turn. Rylus watched silently, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. She had seen many commanders in the Hall of Convergence, but none had moved like this. None had combined instinct, creativity, and courage in such a way. Finally, after hours of relentless engagement, the enemy commander signaled retreat. Daniel's fleets had survived and key positions were secured. The hall fell silent. The alien spectators whispered among themselves, some in awe, some in fear. Daniel sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over him. He had faced the truth of the game, the weight of real consequences, and he had survived. More than survived, he had triumphed. Rylus stood beside him, her expression softening. "You have learned the truth, Daniel, and you have shown what humans can do when faced with impossible odds, but remember, the game is not over. The challenges ahead will test everything you have learned. And now, you understand why humans are both respected and feared." Daniel nodded slowly. He had begun to see it himself. Humans were underestimated, yes, but in moments of real danger, when instinct and courage mattered more than calculation, they could achieve the impossible. And, as the Hall of Convergence prepared for the next wave, Daniel felt a deep resolve. He would face whatever came next, not for the game, not for glory, but for the lives that depended on him, and for the strength of humanity that no one could predict. The Hall of Convergence buzzed with tension. Daniel stood at the command platform, staring at the holographic battlefield stretching across the room. Enemy fleets had massed in unprecedented numbers. They were faster, larger, and better coordinated than anything he had faced before. Rylus's voice broke the silence. "This is it, Daniel, the final wave. Every decision you make now will determine the outcome, not just for the simulation, but for the reality it represents." Daniel took a deep breath. His hands hovered over the controls, fingers trembling slightly, but his mind was sharp. He had survived impossible odds, adapted to countless threats, and discovered the human edge, instinct, creativity, and courage. This is the hardest yet," Daniel muttered. "Yes," Rylus said softly. "But you are ready. Trust yourself." The enemy fleets advanced, forming a massive wall of ships across the holographic void. Their commander, golden-armored and towering, appeared on the main display. Its voice was sharp, echoing across the hall. "Human Daniel Ward," it said, "you have survived where others have failed. But this is the final test. Either you fall, or you prove the strength of your kind once and for all." Daniel swallowed hard. Fear clawed at his chest, but he refused to let it control him. Humans survived in the face of fear. Humans thrived where others hesitated. He surveyed the battlefield. Enemy ships were in perfect formation, moving predictably, relying on centuries of experience. Daniel smiled faintly. That predictability was his advantage. "All right," he whispered. "Time to show them what humans can do." He split his fleet into multiple groups, Scouts zipped forward, harassing enemy flanks. Decoy fleets drew enemy fire, while hidden strike teams prepared for a surprise assault. Daniel did not hesitate. Every move was bold, risky, and instinctive. The enemy commander growled, "Impossible. How can one human command so effective?"